we'll get into a little bit more of a serious conversation here. Lauren Hopkins of Ginternet. Lauren's a great follow. Follow her on Twitter at Lauren Hopkins96. A lot of the work they're doing, not just covering the Larry Nassar scandal, but also gymnastics as a whole. And we're glad to have Lauren on the line today because I don't think this story is getting enough coverage. So, Lauren, appreciate the time. How you doing today?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm doing pretty good. So, my first question is, and I think it's also the question that I've been asked a lot. I've had a lot of people, when I run into, ask me about this. How on earth did what Larry Nassar did, the evil that he perpetrated, go on so long in the gymnastics world?
I mean, he literally manipulated every single person that ever came into his life. I think if he met you for 5 seconds at a meet, he would send you on Facebook and suddenly you'd be talking and chatting, and it was all because he wanted to make sure that every single person he met would be on his side. And so, I mean, that was my story with him, was just coming in as, just starting out writing about the sport and then chatting with him. He always had gossip about what went on at the national team camps and stuff like that. And so you get this picture of him as this guy who really loves the sport, is just so passionate about gymnastics that he wants to share all this information. He was always talking about the welfare of the athletes, how the camps were so intense, so hard, so strict, and he was always complaining about that. He wished they had better support systems at the ranch, and he liked to be that person who was there for them and who gave them, if they wanted like candy or a gift or something like that, that just made them feel better in these intense situations. He was that person for them, just like he was that like friend or confidant to the many people he reached out to, so that when people did come forward, the response from everyone was, oh, Larry, he would never do anything like that. And many, many people did come forward, but that was the response they were always met with, including parents of some of the victims who were told, this is a medical treatment that's required. If your kid wants to go to the Olympics, they need this treatment. And so parents were fooled, literally just everyone completely fooled. He's a master manipulator, basically, and that's how he was able to get away with it for about 30 years.
Lauren, is also part of this the fact that there's just corruption in a lot of these individual sports that involve youth. The whole fact that the Karolyi camp is so isolated. They don't have a cell phone signal out there. The fact that, there's so many times the parents, they're sending their kids off and they're trusting these coaches. They're trusting these people to have the best welfare of their kids in mind, that a lot of things that do happen, whether it is what the evil that Larry did, or it's, the reported assaults kind of things that happen that some of the coaches do to the kids, or it's, people stealing money and resources from these kids. It seems so much like because it's not seen that it's overlooked.
Yeah, and I think lack of transparency was definitely a big contributor to this as well. When you have kids that do come forward and they tell their coach, and the coach then tells the national team staff, but then the national team staff keeps it a secret from everyone else in the world. It's like, they did, when they first had someone come forward in 2015, they did their own internal investigation that lasted, I think, 2 months before they ended up calling the FBI. And it's just stuff like that where they're told, don't say anything about this publicly, don't say anything about this to your family or friends. It's just kept so hidden and so under just secrets and lies and all of this other stuff. And I mean, I guess that happens a lot in business, that happens a lot in the world in general, but this is a sport where kids, minors, are front and foremost, and they're the ones that are being kind of screwed over by these secrets and lies from the adults at the top. And so I think when you are dealing with children, with young people, you really have to have that transparency so that that what's happening at these camps is legitimate. And that just wasn't happening. It's always so like no one talks about anything that's going on, and it's very hard to run a system like that that's safe for kids when they're expected to keep everything a secret.
Whether it's Dominique Moceanu talking about the different things that she's gone through, whether it's, just the litany of young women who faced Larry Nassar this week, it seems like the corruption in USA Gymnastics was much more than just one guy doing evil things. It seems like whether it's the Karolyi camp and the things that happened there, whether it's Larry Nassar, it just seems like there's almost like a 20-year period of just an entire system that failed these young athletes.
Yeah, that's accurate. I mean, probably going back to the history of the sport in the U.S., there's stories from the 60s and 70s even that mirror what's happening today. And I know in the 90s a book came out called Little Girls in Pretty Boxes, and it was all about the abuse in the sport back then. And the book was supposed to make this, big change and overhaul to the system, but really nothing changed. What changed in reality was the propaganda, basically, that would come from USA Gymnastics, where, athletes would give interviews and they're kind of given media training and they're instructed to say things like, oh, it's such an honor to represent my country, but they're not allowed to talk about anything other than just being proud to be competing for the USA. And so you hear these one after another, and you see all of these reports coming out of USA Gymnastics about they're winning the gold medals and they're doing this and they're doing that. And I remember, I think it was prior to 2016 Olympic Games, Aly Raisman had an interview that came out through USA Gymnastics. It was all about how everything is so happy there and no one has an eating disorder and no one has any problems and they're all just like one big happy family. It's all sunshine and rainbows. But it's kind of, you do question these things, but you also, if you're a little bit optimistic, you hope maybe things have changed and maybe this is what it's like now. But then you hear about something like this, and then not only does the Larry Nassar stuff come out, but then every other coach abusing children, kind of those incidents, and then being at the ranch with the Karolyis and not having proper nutrition or not having proper housing or something like that, and then not being able to tell their parents when stuff is going on. I think once the Nassar stuff broke, all of this other stuff came out, and it was just kind of like the whole system is just a mess. It's not a one guy problem. It's the entire system that needs to be kind of, starting from when they're 5 years old and they're learning. They learn at a young age. You are not supposed to question anything. What your coach tells you, what the national team staff tells you, once you get to that level, that's what's going to get you to the Olympics. That's what you follow. And if you want to go to the Olympics, you do exactly what you're told and you don't question a thing. And I think that's the biggest contributor to, into making these gymnasts think like, I'm not a person, I'm like an athlete, a cog in the machine, but I can't complain or I won't go to the Olympic Games. So it's really like foundational where everything is kind of rotting.
Lauren Hopkins joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. You can follow her on Twitter at Lauren Hopkins96. She's been covering gymnastics for a while, currently with Gymternet. Easy for me to say. We got to laugh about something in the middle of all this. So might as well laugh about me mispronouncing a name. Lauren, when you go back to what went on this week, what Aly Raisman said. I mean, if anybody hasn't watched the full 14 plus minutes of it, you have to. You have to sit down and hear what she said. Or if you just get a chance, listening to Maddie Lars talk about how she purposely injured herself so she doesn't have to deal with this anymore. For me, someone like me, the first sport I ever participated was gymnastics before I got into martial arts. And, I've been a gym rat since the 96 Olympics, and I watched college gymnastics, and all that stuff. And for me to hear what has happened and knowing that there were horrible things happening before the Larry Nassar stuff came out, it's just, to me, it feels like I don't understand. And maybe part of this is naivete on my part, or maybe part of this is just, not fully understanding the full scope of this. But how can not at least one person have stepped up or stepped in and said no, or stepped in on behalf of these children and said, no, that's not good, or this is not healthy, or no, the kids shouldn't be isolated? Why couldn't one person 5, 10, 15 years ago speak up?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to say, and I don't want to say that they're all, drinking the Kool-Aid. These are adults that have, free will and the ability to say something. But I do think that they were all kind of maybe not putting the athlete's best interests at heart, and they're thinking, well, if I have a kid who wants to make the world's team or the Olympic team or something, then I better not be the one to step out of line. And I know there were coaches in the past that have said, I don't want my kids going to the ranch and doing 2-a-day training sessions without any day off. And so there were changes made, and Marta Karolyi there was pictures, probably propaganda now that you think back on it, but of Marta Karolyi taking one of the teams to the mall on a day off between training. And so you see this kind of stuff, and you're like, oh, okay, so some coaches are saying stuff, and hopefully that things are better and that they are being listened to. But I think overall, the majority of coaches if they weren't afraid to stand up, they were afraid that if they did stand up, that would mean that their kid would lose a spot on a team. And I do know that a lot of the team decisions were not influenced directly by who was the best, but by, sometimes who would be making money. I know there were some instances where certain athletes made world teams or whatever because they became stars for the program. And so if your kid is not one of those top girls that can make a team despite not having a best performance, then you don't want to be a coach that steps up and says anything because you're afraid that, if my kid has a chance, I don't want to ruin that for her. And so I think a lot of them go with the flow, so to speak. And I remember hearing from one coach in, I think it was 2011 during World Championships, and he was kind of complaining on a blog and then complaining to a bunch of people about the ranch and how overworked the girls were and how it was leading to injuries. And then he later retracted what he said and went on to say, I love the Tigers. They're my favorite team. And sometimes I question the lineup, but I don't want to, I'm not the person that's making the lineup, and I can't, I don't know where they're coming from, and I have to respect their decision. And that's kind of what he compared Marta Karolyi to and her way of doing things. And so it was kind of almost like looking back on it, his way of excusing abusive conditions because it led to gold medals, basically, which that's pretty much how USA Gymnastics has functioned. It's medals first, athletes second, which we know now. And I think many coaches were on that same sort of thought train of we want to get the gold, so it's worth training on, a torn ligament or a broken toe or something. And that's why these gymnasts were competing injured. That's why they were training hard and not necessarily receiving the proper care. And that's why coaches weren't really willing to say anything about it.
Lauren, I really appreciate your insights into all this. I kind of wanted to get someone who wasn't, new to the show. I feel like some people who are covering this, no offense to them, and I appreciate the national coverage it has gotten because it needs to be brought to light.
Oh, yeah.
But I feel like some of the people who are covering it, it's kind of, they're kind of just the new people on the scene. You know what I mean? They don't really understand that this goes well beyond just Larry Nassar.
Yeah.
Lauren, before I let you go, and I'm more of a lighthearted conversation, so is this the year is the UCLA girls actually going to win a championship, or is this going to be another year where Oklahoma and Florida are in the finals?
I really hope UCLA can do it this year. They've been trying so hard, and they've had so many injuries, but now they're finally pretty much all healthy. And I think if they can just stay healthy through the end of the season, I think they actually have a shot of potentially upsetting Oklahoma. But Oklahoma looks really, really good right now. So, I think it could be a tight championships this year.
I mean, I don't really have someone I'm really rooting for this year. Like in the past, when Holly Blansky was at Nebraska, I mean, that girl was just a boss. Mm-hmm. So yeah. I was always hoping Nebraska might, win something, but obviously it didn't happen. So
yeah,
I'm kind of stuck on just wanting somebody to win who's not Oklahoma or Florida now. So
yeah. There's a couple. I mean, Michigan, Big Ten in general, they need to have their day in the sun. I think. Hopefully, Michigan this year can get closer. I know they've gotten close in the past couple of years, but then kind of fizzle out at the end of the season. But I think Michigan has a chance. UCLA, hopefully, and then LSU is stepping up too. So hopefully, it can be a little bit more competitive this year.
Well, Lauren, I really appreciate the time. Appreciate you taking time out of your Saturday to join us and kind of give our listeners a little more insight into the whole big picture of not just Larry Nassar, but the gymnastics world as a whole. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. Thank you so much for having me.